this event. Today he's not here in this role of an old school, very old school security guy. But yeah, I leave this up to you to describe your role. But believe me, he is certainly qualified to talk about this exact subject.
Thanks, Zeno. Okay, well, I appreciate that. I'm very happy to be here. As Zeno said, ER&W and Troopers is near and dear to my heart, and I was in Graham Nielsen's presentation and saw something that is theoretical turned to reality. So, you know, once again, Troopers has scooped us, but maybe in Dayton in the fall we'll have the next version of his research. So, but yeah, today, you know, normally we talk. You'll hear me speaking about theoretical risks and talking about the hackers side of things and packet wars and cyber war and stuff like that. But this is something that is closer to the thing that I do for a profession. And, you know, fun play on words here, the truth about outsourcing insecurity or security. And first thing I want to do is put my disclaimer up here. I won't read it, but assume that it's in effect. And essentially, everything I'm about to tell you has nothing to do with my day job or my employer, and they, you know, assume no responsibility for the accuracy of the information or its usefulness for any purposes. So have a nice day. And you know, outsourcing is one of those terms that is used differently by many different people. So I think it's important for purposes of our conversation today to define what the definition is. And this is one that I've come up with. I find it very useful to use this definition. It's outsourcing is the practice of utilizing third parties to perform business functions that were once performed internally. Okay, pretty easy definition. If we went through the litany of all the different things that could fall into that category, you know, augmenting existing expertise, so consulting, that's kind of a form of outsourcing. Hosting services, that's something that's been, people outsource their hosting. In fact, at one time, that was the only way you could put a website was to host it somewhere else. Manage this and that. Telcos, long practice of managing customer premise equipment, typically routers or modems. And then those became firewalls and intrusion prevention, intrusion detection. So, you know, managing widgets. This was one that was real big called offshoring, where you're basically outsourcing application development. You would have an in-house organization that did it, and you sent it to a third party. The term offshoring was typically those were in markets that were less expensive from a resourcing standpoint. That practice continues. And then applications as a service or cloud services, Salesforce.com. Very specific applications, so instead of hosting them and maintaining them yourselves internally, you go to the cloud or an ASP provider. And then total IT outsourcing, partnering as we call it. So the focus of our conversation, my presentation today will be on this partnering, this total IT outsourcing. So that's the practice of using third parties to deliver all information technology services. So that's going to include your network, application, compute, storage, and the management of the endpoint devices, typically PCs or servers, but those could also be HIP computing devices, mobile phones, etc. Now, in these the life cycle of doing something like this, there's two approaches to doing total outsourcing. There is the organic approach, natural evolution, measured, planned, and strategic. And then there is the Big Bang Theory, instant gratification. Anybody have an idea of which of these two paths most large organizations gravitate towards? Instant gratification, yes. And that's what we're going to talk about. So I think when you look at any system and try to identify the good parts, the bads, opportunities, it's very important to understand the moving parts. And so the players in the Big Bang Theory of total IT outsourcing is the organizational leadership. And maybe I should just real quickly tell you about my experience. I've actually been in each one of these roles at different times. So I think that's maybe what Enna was referring to, that I'm uniquely qualified to talk about this. So there's the organizational leadership. You have the vendors, or the vendor or vendors that are going to be playing in this, typically prime and multiple subs. You have the subject matter experts, okay? These are the smart people that used to make all the decisions, and they're involved still, but in a different capacity. And then you have the end users, which are going to be the ultimate consumers of these services. And a lot of times, they're the ones farthest from any of these decisions, and they end up with the biggest impact. So when we look at the players involved, I think it's important then next to understand the power of perspective. And if we can put ourselves in each one of those players' roles and look at what the objectives are, and you know, we could also call this the power of perspective or the lack of empathy. Because when we're sitting here looking at the good and the bad and the ugly in total outsourcing, sometimes we forget to see it through somebody else's eyes. So that's one of the things that I want to introduce here and talk about. And we'll go through the motivation of each of the actors or the players in this particular play. The organizational leadership. Typically, this decision to do an outsourcing deal, this is where it starts. And this is a very small group of individuals with very specific motivation. Any ideas what their main motivation is? Reduce cost. And in their mind, they equate that to force reduction. Let's face it, you know, spreadsheets are much easier to manage than people. People have all these HR, I mean, you have a lot of labor laws in the EU. You know, there are problems, you have to keep them happy. Just, you know, lots of challenges there. So they are getting two things for the price of one. They're going to save money, cost reduction, and they're also going to get rid of people who tend to, and especially it's going to be those techie people they're getting rid of, which are very hard. They're strange, nerd-like creatures that we don't understand. They're also going for simplification. And the concept, the thought that makes all this possible is whatever it is that we've been doing in an enterprise or large organizations is now commoditized to the point where we don't need those complex, difficult people. We can get rid of that cost, and it's obviously going to have the side benefit of simplifying things. Because now all I got to do is write a check once a quarter, and I'll get my services that I need to run my business. Shareholder value. You'll hear this, especially in publicly owned companies. They'll throw that around. You know, we're going to tell the street what we're doing so that the markets will reward us because we are taking care of our shareholders. And the flawed idea that they're actually transferring risk. And this is very important because every contract that I've ever read from a standard shared service, they will give you SLAs, but there'll be no guarantee of integrity or confidentiality of the data or their handling of the data. So that's very important. So typically organizational leaderships think they're transferring risk. They're not. They still own the risk. They're just shifting the responsibility for the controls to somebody else. And that ultimately may not be a good thing. So the next actor, vendor. I didn't even put bullets up here. Vendors are motivated by profit. That's why they're in the business to do that. And I don't know that we need to say any more about that. The SMEs, subject matter experts. I think most of the subject matter experts, I was a subject matter expert at one time in one of these outsourcing deals. And, you know, emotionally or consciously, the motivation there is status quo. People don't like change. Why do we have to change? We actually have some pretty good things. We're on a path to do even better things in the future. So let's just keep everything the way it is. And quality, right? I love this organization so much. I want to keep things the way they are, and we're going to improve it and add quality because I care. I care more than anybody else about this organization. That's why I'm a SME. Then there's this other little thing that sometimes creeps in, consciously or subconsciously, the idea of self-preservation. What's going to happen to me in my nice, comfortable role here if we outsource my job to somebody else? Don't know. People don't like not knowing. And then there are the end users, okay? Typically, IT organizations, to a vendor, they are the customer. But in reality, it's the end user that is the ultimate customer of these vendors. And what do they care about? They want a positive user experience. They want this technology to be easy to use. They don't want to have to understand all the nuances or complexity involved. Transparent. They want it to be invisible. Just work. Always on. Now, in some large organizations, there'll be a chargeback scheme that allows them to get a discounted service from buying from an internal organization, and they expect what every other consumers expect, which is value for money. Seems very reasonable from their perspective. And they want relevant and expansive service catalogs. They want choice. This term service catalog, is everybody familiar with ITIL terms? And essentially, if you're going to go buy services, it'd be nice to know, oh, here's the BlackBerry device or the mobile device. It comes in these colors. It has this kind of cool ringtone. This is how much it costs. Make it very easy to subscribe to those services. Okay, so any questions about the players? Do you think I've missed any of the high-level moving parts as far as the players go? All right, so now let's talk about the stages of partnering. What goes on? Well, there's some basic parts of the timeline. The first is the pursuit, and we'll talk about the pursuit in detail. And then we have something we're calling the as-is, where-is. This is the estate. So you're going to give the estate over to somebody else, and they're going to maintain that estate at some level that's agreed to. And then they're going to transform. You'll hear this termed a lot of different ways. Transform, modernize, refresh, things like that. And then, if you're lucky, business as usual, and life is good. So let's go into details on each one of these. So the pursuit, it's all good. The characteristics of the pursuit are a tightly controlled RFP goes out. Typically, it will not go to the street. It will go to request for proposal is an RFP. And it'll say, here is what we have, here's what we think it's worth, and the 3 or 4 large vendors that get a shot at it, we want you to take all this off our hands. Promises, promises. Of course, everybody wants this business. When we're talking about these deals, even though the dollar's not very strong right now, you're talking about $500 million deals, billion-dollar deals over periods of time, 4 to 7 years. And they'll promise everything because they want to win that. Then the contract is awarded. So that's essentially the pursuit. Lots of things can go wrong in here, and we'll talk about those. Then the as-is, where-is. And I say kinda because even though you're managing the current estate, we call this the honeymoon phase, the characteristics that you have to be aware of is there's going to be a discovery or census. Because much like the promises that were made by the vendor to the customer or the client made some promises to the vendor. In fact, that was institutionalized in the RFP. It says, we have this many devices. We have this many problem tickets. Our estate is relatively new. We don't have any antiquated systems out there. All our service contracts are up to snuff. So this discovery and census phase is when both parties start to understand a little bit about each other, and that maybe the CMDB wasn't as accurate. And oh yeah, it's a spreadsheet. It's not really a database, and there's no such thing as version control. And yeah, our ticket count is about 5 times higher than it really, we presented in the RFP. Lots of things like that. This lack of accurate data is how you're starting your relationship, and it pretty much sets the pace for the rest of the engagement. And obviously, I referenced the antiquated estate. People just don't know what they have. I heard one of the speakers earlier asking if they had any practices out there of really keeping a census on this stuff, or even knowing what they're seeing in their logs or what's generating logs, or even what that black box in the corner does. Well, we don't know what it does, but the last time somebody touched it, the network went down, so just leave it alone. And again, this is kind of that concept where the people who are outsourcing say, boy, that's too difficult. Let's just give it to this third party, and they'll fix everything for us. And then, of course, this is the most expensive part of the journey, because what you'll see during this pursuit is from the vendor side, they have this concept, the piling on. There'll just be lots of people in suits, lots of smart people, and this is all these new faces come in. And by the way, if you were ever going to go after an entity, this is their most vulnerable time, because there's people who just show up that you have no idea who they are. Sometimes they'll all have the same accent. Sometimes they'll all dress the same, but there'll just be a whole bunch of people, and they're just throwing people at this deal because it's so high profile. And of course, it's the honeymoon. We want to show you that that we care. Then in the transformation, it's the point of no return, right? Characteristics of the transformation stage is this concept of shared versus bespoke. So, and bespoke is a term that we use for custom. So the way you get to save money is not by using custom solutions, it's by using standard shared services. But in reality, the only people that understood what they were buying were the top leadership, and they really didn't understand what they were buying. They knew they were going to save money and get rid of people. And in order to do that, you have to go from using the custom environments that you've had forever to using something that's shared service. And this idea of piecemeal versus holistic. Most of these deals will suggest, well, you can use 90 or 80% of the custom, 90 or 80% of the standard service, and just put this little bit of custom overlay on top, and that'll get you kind of where you need to be in the middle. And of course, anything bespoke or custom in a standard shared service breaks all the benefits of a shared service, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Time and cost pressure. Because there was so much money and effort spent in the transition or the honeymoon, the as-is, where-is state, the cost benefit is now disappearing. So your time windows start to shrink. And all those people that were there early on billing your program and charging the client, well, they're gone now. So you're left with the same business goals, but less time and less budget, which is added pressure. The business as usual, if you make it to the last stage, it's either going to be a Lovefest, or something else. And this ends up litigation. Now the problem with that, nobody wants to be in this state, and I have not seen anybody in the love state yet, but theoretically it's possible. And what you end up having to develop, and what becomes a focus that in reality should have been focused early on, is this idea of governance and metrics. It's like, wow, if we would have had a way to measure you differently than we used to, if we would have had a governance forum, we could have, not spent all our money up front, and we wouldn't have risked being in this relationship that we want to get out of. The idea of innovation, again, which is a euphemism for efficiency and cost savings. I used to think that innovation meant coming up with new, great, brilliant ideas and taking technology and serving mankind. No, it's about saving money. And again, getting rid of people, automation. But if you make it to the end here, and you are on a standard shared platform, and you adopt certain kind of principles, it does give you flexibility. It essentially, as the company, organization outsourcing the business, if you do this right, you should actually be able to shop those services very easily in the future, if you take the lessons learned. But we'll see where some of the problems are. So if these are basic steps seem reasonable, I mean, let's put a show of hands. How many people have had some experience with total outsourcing? Okay. Even maybe just partial outsourcing. I mean, these themes, offshoring, Working with third parties to do things that you used to keep very close? Okay. So hopefully some of these things are, I see you nodding your head, some of these things are ringing true. Well, why does it go bad? If everybody knows what the motivation is, everybody, why does it go so bad? Well, the first part is the players are not aligned. This is a biggie. If you look at all the actors in there, the leadership wants to save money and get rid of people. The vendor wants to make money, so they're already in conflict. If you save money and I'm a vendor, maybe I'm not making as much money or giving as much shareholder value as I could. You're the leadership. I want to get rid of people. Well, I'm a SME. I'm a person. Are you going to get rid of me? So the goals and objectives aren't necessarily aligned there. That's a big problem. Also, maturity. The idea that you can take an immature organization and with bad practices, no governance, no way to really measure success. And a lot of reasons that people outsource this is that third party can do it better than we can. What makes you think they can do it better? They have the same human issue. They have to resource those humans. They have to train them. If we're going to take over your existing estate, what makes you think that we can manage it any better than the people who've built it? It's not documented. You don't have a CMDB. So all those things, so that's the biggest fallacy is that if you don't have a mature operations, you can't outsource it and expect it to run better quickly. You can't get to that stage until you change some things, and that's when you start adopting the standard shared services. The other is due diligence. We'll talk about the contract here in a minute, and this is due diligence on all parts. Typically, there's not a level of due diligence done by the senior leadership that's outsourcing this because they just don't know enough. And by the way, they don't really want to talk to people about what they're doing. If they did their due diligence internally, they would have to go make people aware of what they had in mind. And of course, we've already talked a little bit about how humans react to change, which is typically, I don't have the slide here, but it's fear, denial. There's a cycle there. And so in order to do proper due diligence, they would have to expose their plans to the people that they're going to outsource anyways, and that's not very good. Additionally, the vendors have such a small time to make the deal, and it's very competitive. There's no way they could consume enough data to go do the validation. So one of the things that typically get put into agreements is during that discovery phase, there's an opportunity to challenge things in the agreement, assuming that the agreement was written properly. SLAs, service level agreements. How do we measure success? Well, if you're a savvy company and you're outsourcing something and you've never been able to get good visibility to your operations, what's one of the first things you're going to think about? I'm going to do it right. I'm going to put some real hardcore SLAs in place. Maybe some things that are unachievable. And in order for the vendor to get the business, I'm going to make them sign up for these SLAs. And the vendors may sign up for those SLAs thinking that they'll have an opportunity to innovate later on, or that how bad could it be? We can certainly do this. That's what our marketing brochures say. I'm quite sure we can do that. And by the way, just because you can do something in the United States or in Europe does not necessarily mean you can do it in Northern Africa, the Middle East, or South America. That's also a hallmark of large outsourcing deals, is that it's a global estate. And anybody can do a center of excellence in certain regions, but to be able to live up to the same SLA everywhere, that's a challenge. That's one of the things that goes bad. There's typically not different SLAs. It's one set of SLAs across the board. And then we have this idea of OLAs. So, well, SLAs are between the partners, the vendor, and the organizational leadership vis-a-vis the contract. OLAs, or operational level agreements, are between the prime vendor and their partners. And those are either third-party partners or internal service organizations. So there, I'll be happy to go on record, there is no prime vendor that can take on a global outsourcing deal by themselves. Every one of the vendors use partners, whether they're actually wearing a partner's shirt and hat when they come in, or if they're declared as being partners. And a lot of it has to do with what I was saying before, is that you just don't have a capability. In the telco industry especially, you can't buy circuits in some countries. You have to go through a partner. How do you get equipment in through customs? Do you go set up an operation to support one customer? No, you go find a big player in that particular space and you partner with them. And one of the things that we, at least in my experience, what I have seen in these relationships is if you don't know your SLAs, which you've already signed up for, and now you're going to very quickly bring your partners on board, typically they aren't negotiating those OLAs. Or if they are, your OLAs don't map to your SLAs, meaning you have contractual obligation to the client, which you can't get a contractual obligation to deliver that through your third party, because it's just impossible, because you signed up for something that could never happen in reality. Those are the landmines. And then we'll get to GRC, or governance, risk, and compliance. And again, this doesn't exist. If you had a mature practice before you outsourced to a vendor, and you didn't set up the seams, that's an ITIL term, which basically those are the interactions between all the different players, using that, typically you'll have to evolve that over the years. And now that you've actually increased the number of players, you may have a single vendor with a contract, but they on the back end have all these partners. And in addition, within the organization, you have a lot of players, right? So there's compliance, there's security, there's the business, there's regional, there's lines of business. If you don't have a mature governance practice there, in the new world, you won't have it. And even if you do have a mature practice, you're going to have to evolve that practice because everything's changed. Does this kind of make sense? These are the biggies. And we can talk specifically about, and that's what we're going to get into here. So, the deck is stacked against you. And incidentally, security and compliance sucks, so do you. Now, one of the reasons I called this, at a security conference and really talk about, because to date, I really haven't talked about security per se. We'll dig into that a little bit. But why do I think the security and compliance folks have the best chance of helping? Most of these deals are very heads down, meaning people come in and are engaged for the transition phase, and then they leave. So that's all the suits and the smart people that fly in, there's pros, and they do their little bit, and they say, yeah, this is how you're going to do it. Here's the project plan. See you later. Good luck. Well, the security and compliance guys are sitting there going, okay, fine, we get that. We can believe in that plan. And then you get a whole new group of people that come in to do the implementation of that plan. They go, oh, that's all theory. None of that stuff really works in the real world. Now you get the security and compliance guys who, by the way, they're the ones that stick around. They sit there and go, well, wait a minute. Let's get this. Well, this guy's gone to the next deal, right? And typically in large organizations too, as soon as the deal's done, they get their promotion, or maybe they move to another organization, so they're not responsible for executing this. But we're still here, the security and compliance folks, so we get to see it. So I think we're positioned to be what I'll call, an impact player. And what I mean by an impact player is be business relevant. I mean, we heard Enno talk about risk assessments that focus on the relevant. If we're going to elevate the profession of security and compliance, we have to become relevant to the business. Because I would reckon that most of these deals, the security and compliance people are not part of that senior leadership team that's signing the deal to save a bunch of money. They may be brought in at the 11th hour to review the agreement. Maybe. I'll give you when we talk about the contract stuff, I'll give you some real world case studies and at the opposite ends of the spectrum. Be business reasonable, okay? You have to matter to the business by being relevant, but you also have to be business reasonable. And that means you kind of have to check your emotions at the door and focus on the things that matter to the business. Get aligned with the business. Don't be an enemy of the business. And then generate and cultivate the confidence. And I don't think I didn't see it in Enno's slide deck here, but he's introduced me to this idea of, confidence is basically trust and control. And so when you had all of this stuff in your own organization, did you trust it because you controlled it, right? Was that where you got the control, the trust from? Or did you trust it because you had great visibility into the metrics and your security metrics, and you knew exactly how effective your spend was? I would gather that your confidence level was misguided because it was all based on the fact that you had control. You spent the money, you could fire the people, you could replace the people, you could actually go see the technology. It's not in the cloud, right? It's there. Yeah, there's our firewalls, there's our IP. Look, they've got lights, they blink. Yes, we are in control of our own destiny. Well, now that's changing. So in order to be an impact player in this changing world, how do you develop trust when you don't control things through normal means? What's the control? What's the control in an outsourcing deal? Okay, we'll talk about that, but just keep that in mind. So how do we become an impact player at every stage in the deal? During the pursuit, the request for proposal. If you're lucky enough to be a part of the team that's writing that request for proposal, you have a leg up, because that's where you're essentially putting all the success criteria for that contract being awarded. This is big. Now, the deals that I've been involved in, we got involved at the 11th hour and won. This was, my role in that was SME, and we had a fairly mature practice of governance, and I wouldn't say it was the 11th hour, but it was 10:30, and we did get to put some language into the RFP that allowed us to rank certain vendors on their ability to deliver certain types of things that we felt were important from a compliance and security standpoint. These would be things like external assessments of their cloud, ISO certifications of data centers, external auditors. Where were their data centers? Did they treat, and this was a very similar exercise when we evaluated vendors or providers on the MPLS. Do you manage your MPLS estate the same way everywhere in the world? Oh yeah, sure. Really? Well, yeah, everywhere except like China, places that have prohibitions on encryption, but that really wasn't a big deal, because it turns out none of those big players actually use encryption to manage their own estate, because they have this super private network, So that's where it's important. Very rarely will you have an opportunity as a security professional to be involved in that. So if afterwards you can get visibility to the RFP, that's important. But if you can impact it early, that's even better. And then there's the contract. If you can be involved in writing the contract, you can put certain clauses, in the beginning there was the contract, and it's written in blood. Almost every deal, large deal, on either side of the fence that I've been in, nobody, very small group of people have visibility of this contract. And if you don't see the contract, you will never understand where people are coming from. This is the most important thing that you can do, is understand what was contractually agreed to. Because it'll show you what the success criteria is. It'll show you also, and I've seen really good contracts from the organization side, where they said, you will be vendor A, if awarded, you've been awarded this agreement, you will adhere to all our security policies. What? Who signed that? And I've seen ones where the organization, can't you even put the word relevant or applicable? That's what lawyers are for, right? There's a lawyer word, applicable security policy. Nope. All that crap, antiquated stuff that's kept our business from moving forward, you gotta live with that too. Or contracts that were in the vendor's favor, presumably, where there was no reference to any compliance or security requirements. And again, when we talked about most SLAs, at least in the lease line space, there are no provisions for confidentiality or integrity, only availability. So let me understand this. If you don't deliver on what I think is a good service, you'll give me more of that crappy service for free. So at every level in the organization, needs some visibility to the contract. And I find what I spend a lot of my time doing is explaining nuances of the contract. And just because you sign a contract, that's not necessarily what people thought they bought, right? That's the incarnation of what you think you bought in legalese. Then we have the as is, where is. This is where it gets fun. You start having these contractual obligations. In most of these deals, in order to have control, right, because the contract is your control, by the way. Now that that's how you build trust, is we've got this contract, we can nail them to the wall, we can take them to the lawyers if they don't deliver. They'll put milestones or obligations in there. And that's how, at senior leadership, they can say, oh, we're on track because they made this date, they did this milestone. Oh, wait a minute, we're going to miss this one. We better get in there and intervene because we might have a problem here. Many of these contractual obligations that are put in there as controls, who's writing them? It's the lawyers and the small group of people who are negotiating the contract. And remember, these people are sitting way high up in the organization, so what they think is a significant milestone, like all the equipment should be ordered. Oh, wait, and in Iraq. Yes, ordered it in Iraq. Should they be operational and passing packets? Yeah, probably, but that's not what's written in the contract. So the people who are delivering the contract can absolutely meet that, get it all racked up in there, but we haven't transferred services. So now you're paying for 2 estates. And this is bad for both parties because the risk may be with the vendor if they don't get the stuff in the racks. But once they do, then they have to get paid for, then the client has to pay for a service they're not using. And by the way, who wants to have stuff sitting in a rack for a year, depreciating, not doing anybody any good? That's the kind of things, practical things that happen that are never thought of early on. So sometimes when you see those weird contractual obligations, if you have governance, you can spot them very early once the SMEs start getting involved and try to align. Then there's the discovery phase. So here's all the capabilities the vendor represented that they had via their marketing people. And here's the current estate. And what happens is both parties start to realize, that's not exactly what you have. You know, you said you had 30 tickets a day. Turns out you had 300 tickets a day. You said that 80% of your estate was less than 3 years old. Turns out, you know, 80% of your estate is more than 5 years old. In fact, you've just handed all over your contracts, and they're all end-of-life equipment. So somebody's going to be living with risk during that as-is, where-is phase. Well, that's okay. We're going to transform, so we'll just run faster the transformation. But you got to keep the current business running. And the timing on a lot of these deals, it's a big deal because if you're a smart organization and you have co-terminated all of your maintenance contracts, right? So we only have to buy our maintenance once a year in November. Close the deal in September. And now the vendor inherits his estate that has 30 days of maintenance left on it. That's big bucks because now they have to eat that or they have to live with the risk of not having maintenance on that estate. And that's the kind of detailed discovery that's never done early on. Because again, this is a high-level deal. You know, you're going to give us everything. We're going to save you a bunch of money. We'll figure out how to make it profitable on the back end. Project management. You'll bring a lot of specialists in, and they'll all be focused on different things, different technology. So you got your firewall guys, you got your router guys, you got your LAN guys, you got your server guys, and they're all treating each one of these little transformation projects as a separate project. And nobody has what I'll call a holistic view of dependencies on the other towers. That's a term, I tell term towers, but those are the focus areas. So you'll have somebody that says, well, we're on schedule, until they find they go to flip a switch and they've got no internet because they have a dependency on the firewall people or they have a dependency on the circuit people. And that's why project management's so important, and they don't find out that it's not a holistic project, it's a series of little projects. That is a place where you can make or break a program. The regulations, policies, practices, and standards. This is a big one because if you write a contract and sign a contract that says you'll adhere to a set of policies and have never looked at those policies to understand the impact, you'll get it pretty quick. Once you start trying to change their environment, change the environment of the incumbent organization, and there'll be one SME that says, oh, no, 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 you can't do that. We require two-factor authentication for all remote access. Well, wait, the shared service that we use, we have strong authentication, we just don't use those tokens because our DR capability requires that we have, you know, these failovers and we don't need it. That's where you'll come into some of your conflicts. And without a governance model to resolve those conflicts between your enterprise custom policies that were great for you 5, 10 years ago when they were created, mapping against a standard shared cost-effective service. And one of the tools that you can have, and we'll talk about that, is the ability to look at that delta and do a risk assessment. And then a service catalog. So many times what happens is, we bought this, the contract says this, but the standard catalog looks like this, and they're different. And that reconciliation, because people are not used to describing their services, enterprise services, with a service description. I mean, really, if you think of an enterprise, the services that they're offering, how would you describe the firewall service? We provide perimeter protection using a stateful firewall with, you know, what's the SLA? How long does it take to get a firewall change in today? So you would expect that you'd have that, at least that same level of service during a transition, right? But typically it goes the opposite way. Because the other hallmark of some of these deals is the tight time frames. So, and the human factor, does the SME really, really want to tell the new provider, the new partner, all the things they never wrote down, right? Because it's not a mature practice. They never wrote any of these procedures down. And if they did, they're not maintained. There's no version control. But we expect you in 2 weeks to talk to all these suits that are going to take your job and explain what you've been doing for the last 10 years. And if you are, you know, aware enough of yourself and growing with the organization and feel that you're aligned, are they going to be able to consume 10 years worth of tribal knowledge in 2 weeks? Not going to happen. And that's because we don't really define the services. We don't think of what we do in an enterprise as services, but it really is. How are we doing here? Okay, we're good. The transformation stage. All right, what's going on here? This is where you can absolutely shine. We burn up all the money, right, with the suits coming in. We've learned that maybe we were both misled. Maybe we thought the wrong things. But it's time to make things happen. Now, as the security and compliance guy, you've lived through the different phases. You've been pulling your hair out. What can you do? Well, this idea of agile security or business relevant security, risk management, relative risk management, being the voice of reason and saying, you know, look, in the old world, we did use two-factor authentication. And it was good for us because it was one size fits all. I mean, we could put a fat IPsec client on a machine that we managed, and we could use the state-of-the-art two-factor hard token technology and just give everybody the highest level of security. Now, that's not very cost-effective. That's expensive, but because we were protecting our company's assets, it made sense. Now that we're going to this standard shared services, it's not cost-effective to do all those things. Do we still need that high level of security for everything, or can we use tools of agile security, rapid risk assessments like Enno was talking about, or other business relevant ideas to suggest that the savings of the standard shared service, the different types of controls, new compensating controls that we're putting in place, are business reasonable enough? And can we actually go and change our policies? On several deals, and again, both sides of the fence, we came up with this idea of trusted business partner. And it's the idea that I think a lot of organizations have more than 2 states of being, right? I've been in one organization that had like 5 states of being. Trusted, semi-trusted, kind of trusted, completely untrusted, and then there's some that are binary. You're either trusted or you're untrusted. But you need something different, you know, something in the middle. So this idea of a trusted business partner is, look, we just outsourced, you know, all this work to these people. We are now a partner. We've got the contract for controls. They want to do something that's going to save us $5 million. That's a good thing. Now you can't argue, let me regress a minute. You could argue, if it's in the contract, I don't care about the partner. You've got to deliver. But here's the reality of the world. If you're screwing your partner over, you won't be partners very long, and if they're going to take a $5 million hit because there's something in the contract that does not benefit them, guess what? They're going to find another way to get that $5 million. So when something in the contract that you signed was not in your favor, if you're playing hardball, do you think they're going to give you any breaks? And if you get to the point where you manage one of these agreements just by reading the contract, you'll end up in divorce court. You will not be successful. Because what really has to happen as you evolve and mature is you have to start feeling like a partner, that your mutual success is interdependent on each other. And if the vendor can do a good job and add value, guess what? As the organization, you can reward them with new business, right? And that, once you get to the point where you're not looking at the contract and you're really focused on mutual success, that's when things start to get interesting. And that is the role of security and compliance can actually play, believe it or not, by helping to introduce governance in places where it didn't exist before. Also, reporting metrics and the truth will set you free. My point here is, if you don't develop a way of measuring what it is you're trying to accomplish, when you go into these discussions where people are waiving the contract and they're demanding, you know, this and that, you won't have a basis for fact to talk through real resolution. And again, if you didn't have it before, what makes you think you're going to have it today, especially if you still maintain you don't want to use the standard shared service, but you want to have your custom bespoke service. And you have to start to embrace quickly, rapidly, the idea of alternate compensating controls. The contract is a control, okay? It has certain limits. And so in some of the agreements that, I've seen some agreements where there was nothing about policy in there, and I've seen other agreements where it was just ridiculous and said, you will adhere to all policies. So one of the things that you can help put in place is a forum to discuss risk and compensating controls. And there are all sorts of different kind of controls that aren't things that you could buy off the shelf. Operational and procedural controls, these are huge, and I think they're often underutilized, and certainly very few people have effective operational controls. And by the way, I think Enno would tell you that's probably where you're going to have most of your mistakes. You can have the best technology, if it's not implemented right, maintained right, life cycle owners of assets, you know, understanding who to go to engage on these things. Because a lot of things, times you'll see in these large deals is it'll be this. Well, go talk to this individual. Go talk to, if there are no clear owners, you really won't get resolution. And with clear owners, when you start to articulate different ways to control or to build that confidence, that trust and control, that's when you can shine by saying, hey, here's a new way of looking at it. In the business as usual space, constant improvement. Once you get there and you have the relationship is blossoming and you're not ready to go to divorce court, you realize that your mutual success is interdependent. Now it's time to start getting the value out of the deal, which is constantly improving it. And maybe that's streamlining the operational processes. Maybe that's limiting the mean time to resolution, because presumably you've come in with all new kit, right? It's a standard service. It scales, so you should start to be, and you're measuring it with your metrics. So you should start to take on objectives every year. We're going to push, you know, this much improvement percentage over last year. And of course, there's benefits to both parties by doing that. Your control optimization and alignment. Sometimes you'll hear me talk about what I call latent capabilities. So there is a glut of technology. So we have lots of technology out there that has no affinity for mitigating specific threats. So as we know, stateful firewalls don't do anything as the attacks move up through the stack for anything for application level risk. But people still keep spending money on those firewalls. And so within the vendor space, there's definite incentive for making sure that we're investing in the right controls, that we're not spending a lot of time on controlling things that don't have any risk. But that's also going to have to come from the partner to tell us what's important to them, and then aligning the control optimization with the goals of the organization. Advanced threat intelligence. I put this in here because everybody's talking about persistent threat. But what we can do here is once you have the controls aligned, you understand what the business needs, and you have this kind of visibility and metrics in there, you can start making better decisions on your compensating controls. And so if they want to go do business in a different region and you know you have certain risks there, you can give them real data. And again, now as a security and compliance person, you are a true partner. You have a seat at the table. And then business intelligence. So again, a lot of things that are used to provide threat intelligence that we do strictly from a security perspective, that also has great value in business intelligence. And so those type of reports will get you more visibility, maybe get you into the boardroom, and it should be leveraged. And then all of this, with the end goal, is to become a trusted partner, a trusted advisor. A whisper, instigator, not instigator, insinuator. No, I'm messing that up. But the point is that instead of having to prove your point with data, you'll now have a level of trust and be considered that advisor. So in summary, there's a business reason this deal is being done. And if you're not part of that and you find out after the fact, you can impact it at any of those stages. The earlier you're involved, the better. If you're a mature organization, these things will go, they'll actually go better. If you're not, you're going to have to mature very quickly, or you'll fail. And one party failure is the other party's failure also. I'm getting the 5-minute slide up there, so we can interact now. Are there any questions?
We have pretty
Yes. Protect yourself at all times. Well, there's always risk, right? It's just, is it a business reasonable, acceptable level of risk?
I mean, I once suggested a variant that has not yet been implemented in package law. That is, like usually the gamers, there was a certain target, and there was teams who are trying to protect their target. Protect the target, and those teams usually do not expect another give the network segmentation stuff. But I suggested a variant that is using a kind of dynamic matching. Everybody thinks they attack the same target like network segment and sort of 1.0/24, which is in fact meant so it's protect each other without knowing who attacks who. But this variant has not yet been implemented as far as I know. So I had expected there was not too much risk, but obviously being in an untrustworthy environment might expose it.
So the battle, we call battle space, is designed to be contained, but there could always be collateral damage.
Okay, let's add questions as far as calls. So, Bryan, thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.